The wind howled through the pines, cold and sharp, like the memory of betrayal. In a candlelit room, perched atop a weathered mountain temple, Eli stood trembling. The letter in his hand trembled more than his fingers did. He salved Scawal. His brother's handwriting, sharp, rigid, final, echoed like a scream inside his chest. "I'm gone, you were never enough. Don't follow." Those words shattered something that had clung to life inside him. For years, Eli had held tight to hope, even as silence grew like frost between them. But this was the death rattle of connection. He dropped the letter onto the tatami floor, the ink smudged by a tear he didn't realize had fallen. Outside, a crow cried once, then silence. The candle flickered. Shadows breathed on the walls. He closed his eyes, trying to hold still, trying not to break further. The breath he took was shallow, barely real. And yet in that breath, something old inside him stirred. Ash, rage, and something else. The tiniest pulse of surrender. Morning brought no peace, only pale gray light that touched nothing warmly. Eli hadn't slept. His knees ached from hours kneeling in silence, the letter still lying open on the floor like a wound. He rose slowly, joints stiff, eyes raw. As he stepped outside, the mountain air bit at his skin, crisp and indifferent. Below, the mist coiled through the valleys like ancient breath. The temple bell had not rung. It hadn't in years, not since the day his brother left. Eli walked past it now, its silence heavier than sound. He paused at the overlook where they used to sit as boys, trading secrets and stupid dreams. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. His fingers brushed the stone bench, smooth, cold, familiar. "You left me," he whispered, voice rasping like leaves. And the mountains answered back with silence. Inside the temple, Eli knelt before the old altar. Dust cloaked the offerings, bowls untouched, incense cold. He reached for the matchbox, lit one stick, and placed it upright. The scent was faint at first, then full of memory. Cedar, clove, quiet pain. The incense curled upward, seeking sky. "Forgive me," he said to no one, to everyone, to the aching gap inside his chest. He bowed low, forehead touching wood that had borne 1,000 prayers. Yet none were answered. He didn't know why he said it. Perhaps not for his brother, but for himself, for the part of him that clung to blame like it was love. The silence hummed. The smoke rose, steady and still. And as it did, a single snowflake drifted through the broken eave, melting instantly on the flame. It felt like an answer. Or maybe a goodbye. The crow returned. It landed on the windowsill, black eyes fixed on Eli, as though it knew something he didn't. He stared back, breath held. In the quiet, their gaze locked like two old monks keeping a secret. Then the bird cawed once and flapped away, feathers catching wind like sails on a dark sea. Eli turned to the empty room. Every object was charged now. His brother's cushion, still where he left it. The chipped teacup they once fought over. The wall scroll with their father's calligraphy, faded but firm. Stillness reveals truth. He walked to the scroll and traced the ink with his fingers. It felt like touching a ghost. "I didn't know how to be still," he said aloud, as if the room were listening. And maybe it was. Later, seated alone with tea grown cold, Eli replayed the last conversation they had. It had ended in silence. Not anger, just a blankness too deep to scale. He remembered saying, "I'll wait," and his brother only nodded. That nod, more final than any goodbye. He sipped the tea, bitter and stale. The silence now was different. Less like punishment, more like a waiting room. "Maybe this is the beginning," he whispered. Not of reconciliation, but of truth. Of facing the ache without hoping it'll vanish. He closed his eyes and inhaled the air, half incense, half winter. Outside the storm had passed. The crow was gone. The bench was still there. And for the first time, the silence felt almost kind. Eli walked the forest path behind the temple, worn down by centuries of sandals and solitude. Each step crunched frost-bitten leaves, each breath visible in the still, cold air. The sky was bruised with early morning hues, lavender, indigo, silver. This trail had once been his escape, a place he and his brother would run barefoot as children, pretending the mossy stones were islands and the foxes were dragons. Now it was just quiet. The roots reached up like old bones, and the trees leaned in close, whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. He stopped near a stream, frozen at the surface, water flowing like a ghost beneath. He knelt, touched the ice. It didn't crack, didn't yield. Like him, he muttered. A part of him had always believed the silence between them would thaw. But not all rivers wanted to be free. Some chose to sleep. Unwarmed. Back inside the temple, Eli unrolled an old scroll of memories, sketches he and his brother had drawn as children. Thick figures with swords, dragons coiled around temples, comically large tea bowls, and a tiny monk with a smile too wide for his face. It was childish, chaotic, beautiful. His fingers trembled as they hovered over one image, two brothers standing atop a mountain, arms outstretched to the sky. Underneath, in scribbled calligraphy read, "Nothing separates the sky from the sky." Eli laughed softly, bitter and warm. "We believed that," he said. "Until we didn't." The page fluttered slightly in the breeze coming from the broken window. He pressed it flat, gently, as if smoothing out a memory. Some things were too sacred to fold. He stepped into the abandoned side chamber. Dust motes hung like stars in the slanted sunlight. This was their father's room once, a man of silence and tea, of discipline and unexpected tenderness. The room smelled of aged cedar and paper. The tea set still sat on the tray, untouched for years. Eli knelt, lifted the kettle. Empty, of course. He imagined his father's voice, "You don't pour from what isn't full." That voice, calm as dusk, never shouted but always struck deep. "Did you see this coming?" Eli whispered. "Did you know he'd leave?" He wasn't sure who he was asking, his father, his brother, or the part of himself that never stopped waiting. The kettle clinked softly as he set it down, and in that small sound, something old exhaled. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Soft, hesitant flakes that dissolved on contact. Eli stood at the edge of the temple stairs, watching the white settle gently on stone. A memory stirred. Him and his brother lying in the snow, staring up at the sky, waiting to see who could spot the first falling star. His brother always saw it first. "Faster eyes," he'd tease. But Eli suspected he just wanted him to win. That kind of kindness, covert, buried in mischief, was what hurt most now. The snow thickened. Eli held out his hand, catching a flake that didn't melt right away. It sat there perfect, impossible, then vanished. He stared at the empty palm for a long time. "I wish you'd told me why," he said, as though the snow could answer. That night, Eli lit a single lantern and placed it beside his sleeping mat. Shadows swam up the walls again, familiar now. He lay back, eyes open, staring at the wooden beams above. His brother's absence was no longer a scream. It was a hum, constant and low, like a temple bell that never quite stopped ringing. He imagined him out there somewhere, beneath another sky, maybe just as sleepless. "Do you ever think of me?" he whispered. "Do you dream of this place?" The flame flickered as if in response. Sleep didn't come quickly, but it came with breath. Slow, deliberate, aching. He turned on his side, eyes heavy, and for the first time in years whispered into the dark, "I forgive you." The room didn't change, but the silence did. Days passed like breath, soft, unnoticed, essential. But within Eli, a storm churned quietly. He began to speak aloud more often, not to spirits, not to the walls, but to his brother. "Do you remember the night we ran from the monks?" he asked once, staring into the fire. "You laughed so hard you tripped on your robe." Silence answered. Memory had teeth. Some days it bit down hard. Eli paced the inner garden, stepping across gravel patterns he used to rake with his brother. Now each step marred the perfection, and he didn't care. "Why didn't you write sooner? Why only now?" he snapped, as if the wind might echo back an answer. Rage crept into his breath, but under it, grief pulsed, heavy and full of love. That was the cruelest part, anger that refused to let go of affection. Eli returned to the meditation hall, but this time he couldn't sit still. The silence grated. His fingers tapped against his knee, impatient. In his chest, thoughts spiraled like crows in a storm. He remembered how his brother used to sit here, still as stone, eyes closed, mouth soft. "You always found peace so easily," Eli muttered. "But you didn't find me." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken for years. He opened his eyes, breath shallow. Around him, the hall was too still, too empty. His hand curled into a fist. He wanted to throw something. Instead, he stood and walked out, fast, as if trying to outrun the ache. The bell above the entrance didn't chime. Even the hall had stopped listening. That night, Eli dreamed of their last winter together. They were children again, building a lantern from rice paper and bamboo. His brother's hands worked fast, clever. "Hold the base," he said. Eli had fumbled, too eager. The lantern collapsed. Wait. His brother had laughed, not cruelly, but Eli had flushed with shame anyway. In the dream, the scene repeated endlessly. The paper tearing, the light never catching, his brother's voice fading each time, just before Eli could answer. He woke with a gasp, sweat on his brow despite the cold. The dream wasn't memory, it was his guilt reshaping history. Maybe his brother hadn't left because of hatred. Maybe it was Eli's silence that built the distance, brick by brick, year after year. And now, the wall was complete. Eli began writing a letter. Not to send, just to speak. The ink bled into the parchment like confession. "I hated you for leaving," he wrote. "But, deeper still, I hated myself for giving you reasons to go." He paused. The brush hovered over the page. "And maybe, I never asked why because I was afraid I already knew." He breathed in, felt it catch. Truth was sharp. I wasn't kind. I wanted you to be like me. But you weren't. You were freer." He sat back, eyes stinging. He didn't try to stop the tears. They came without violence, like rain after drought. That night, he folded the letter and placed it beneath the incense bowl. Not as an offering, as a release. The next morning, Eli climbed to the upper ridge, somewhere he hadn't gone since his brother's departure. The path was overgrown, stones slick with frost, but his steps were steady. At the top, the world unfurled before him, valleys wrapped in mist, clouds drifting low like ships across an ocean of pine. He sat on the cliff's edge and let the wind lash his face, let it sting. "I'm still here," he whispered. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. In the raw openness of the mountains, he felt small, and finally, that felt right. The need to be understood, to be answered, softened. He didn't forgive his brother, not fully. But he no longer needed to. Let the silence be silence. Let the wind carry what it must. On the third day of snow, the mail runner arrived unexpectedly, his footsteps muffled in the thick white silence. He bowed and handed Eli a sealed parcel, worn, water-stained, clearly aged. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His brother's. Eli's hands shook as he unwrapped it. Inside, a journal. Leather-bound, scarred at the edges. He didn't open it right away. Just held it. The weight of it. The presence of it. It was like suddenly realizing a ghost had been sitting beside you all along. The wind outside howled once, then vanished. Eli sat by the fire, placing the journal in his lap. This wasn't closure. This was ignition. Whatever he had believed was about to change. The first page was dated 2 winters after his brother left. "I didn't go to escape you," I left because I couldn't become you. Eli froze. The words cut cleaner than anger ever could. Page after page unfolded like whispered truths. His brother had wandered through villages, temples, even silence itself. He wrote of a struggle, not with Eli, but with himself. I loved you, but your way was not mine. I was drowning trying to match your stillness when all I ever knew was wind. Eli's breath caught. It wasn't abandonment. It was survival. All these years, he thought he'd been left. But his brother had simply walked a path Eli never saw. Not away from him, but toward his own becoming. Deeper into the journal, the entries became more fragmented. Poems, sketches, questions left unanswered. One stood out, scrawled in bold ink across a torn page. What if love is not staying, but letting go before we break each other? Eli read it over and over. He thought of the silence he had used as punishment. The prayers offered more out of longing than love. He had chained his grief to the idea of betrayal, when in truth, it had always been about misunderstanding. His brother hadn't stopped loving him. He had loved too much to stay and suffocate. For the first time, Eli didn't cry. He simply sat still, letting the warmth of the fire seep into his bones, letting the truth settle like dust that no longer needed to be brushed away. Later, Eli stood before the old pine tree outside the temple, their favorite as boys. The bark still bore a faint scar where they'd carved their initials. His fingers traced it. You never left me, he whispered. The tree had grown, absorbed the mark, but not erased it. Much like memory, it didn't vanish, it changed shape. Eli pressed the journal against the trunk, as if letting the roots drink the truth. The wind stirred above, pine needles swaying gently, not harshly. No voices, no visions. Just presence. Just understanding. You were the wind, Eli said softly, and I was the mountain, neither wrong, just different. The breeze kissed his cheek like a goodbye that didn't hurt. That night, Eli placed the journal beside the altar. He lit incense not as ritual, but as remembrance. Smoke rose in slow spirals, blending with moonlight pouring through the open window. He didn't pray. He didn't speak. He simply bowed, slow, deliberate, humble. It wasn't closure. It was an opening. A new beginning inside the wound. He no longer needed to understand everything. He needed only to accept it had shaped him. As he rose, a crow cried once in the distance. Not ominous. Just there. Existing. Witnessing. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was whole. Eli turned and blew out the candle. Darkness welcomed him gently, like a friend. Eli entered the meditation hall just before dawn. This time he didn't kneel. He stood in the center, barefoot on the cold wooden floor, breath fogging in the air. He had brought nothing, no incense, no cushion, no prayer. Just himself. The version of him that had waited, blamed, mourned. He closed his eyes and let the silence hold him. I forgive you, he whispered again. But more than that, I release you. His arms hung loose, like weights had dropped from them. He exhaled, a soundless letting go. For years he had worn grief like a second skin. But grief was not love. Not always. And love didn't mean clinging to a shadow. The walls didn't echo. But something deep inside him did. It cracked, not from pain, but from truth finally making room. He stepped outside, just as the first amber broke across the horizon. Light painted the snow in gold, and for the first time in weeks, Eli felt its warmth. He descended the steps slowly, feet sinking slightly into fresh powder. With each step, he imagined peeling away an old version of himself. The boy who waited. The brother who carried guilt. The man who feared stillness. At the base of the stairs he stopped. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, distant but present. He raised his face to the sun, letting it wash over him. This was not triumph. It was surrender, the holy kind. The kind that didn't require an answer, only presence. And now, finally, he was present. Back at the pine tree, Eli dug gently into the earth beneath the roots. The journal rested beside him, pages fluttering in the wind. He unearthed a small wooden box, something they'd buried as children. Inside, a cracked marble, a paper crane, and a note scrawled in faded ink. "If we ever forget, come back here." He laughed. It wasn't bitter, just real. "I remembered too late," he said, folding the paper with care. "But I remembered." He didn't take anything from the box. He added something instead, a strip of his brother's journal, the line about love not always staying. Then he closed it, placed it back into the earth, and pressed the soil down gently. "Not forgotten," he said. "Just changed." That evening Eli prepared tea, the way his father taught him. Each motion deliberate. Wash the cup. Heat the bowl. Breathe between actions. He placed 2 cups on the tray. One remained untouched. Not out of habit, but respect. "For you," he said quietly. He drank slowly, tasting everything, bitterness, warmth, memory. In that stillness, he didn't imagine his brother returning. He didn't hope for another letter. He didn't even want to. It was enough to sit here and know that he had loved, and been loved, however imperfectly. He raised the second cup slightly, as if toasting the air, then set it gently back down. The steam curled upward, carrying nothing and everything all at once. The sky above the temple turned navy, stars flickering into place one by one. Eli stepped outside, robe drawn tight, and looked up, not searching, just seeing. The wind had stilled. The world felt paused but not empty. He placed a hand over his heart and closed his eyes. The ache was still there, but lighter, livable. "Good night," he said, to no one and to someone. A final farewell, spoken without resistance. The stars blinked gently above, ancient and indifferent. He turned to go back inside, but not to sleep. To live. To continue. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, that not knowing felt like freedom, not fear. Morning light spilled into the temple like soft forgiveness. Eli swept the wooden floors, slow and mindful, the bristles of the old broom whispering across the boards. This task, once mechanical, had become a ritual. Each motion a quiet agreement with the day. I am still here. I am still breathing. The temple no longer felt like a cage of memory, but a vessel for becoming. As he swept beneath the scroll, the calligraphy stared back at him. Stillness reveals truth. He bowed to it, not as a student seeking meaning, but as someone who had finally lived it. The floor glowed in the light. He didn't know if his brother would ever return, but he knew now that return was never the point. Later, Eli tended the garden, trimming away the frozen remains of winter. His hands moved with gentle care, not in a rush to fix, but simply to participate. The earth was stiff but beginning to yield. New shoots hid beneath the surface, waiting. He smiled at that. Healing was like this too, not instant, not loud. Just gradual emergence. The bonsai he once neglected had begun to sprout anew. He hadn't coaxed it, only given it space. As he pruned its edges, he thought of his brother not as a ghost, but as a wind that once passed through and shaped him. Not gone, not forgotten, just no longer needed to stay. At the overlook once more, Eli sat cross-legged, overlooking the vast pine valley now streaked with early green. The wind touched him gently, no longer sharp. He thought of nothing in particular, and that he realized was peace. There were no more imagined confrontations, no rehearsed speeches, no aching what-ifs. Just breath. Just sky. Just the occasional crow gliding on a thermal updraft. He smiled faintly. This was the same place where he'd once screamed in silence. Now it held him like water does a leaf, fully without resistance. In that stillness, he didn't seek closure. He simply honored the opening that remained. Eli stood beneath the temple bell, the one that hadn't rung in years. Dust clung to its surface like forgotten intention. He reached up, wrapped his fingers around the rope, not to summon anyone, just to see if he could. He pulled slowly. The sound rolled out, deep, thundersoft, timeless. It echoed into the valley, into the sky, into himself. He didn't cry. He didn't bow. He just stood there, eyes open, as the final hum dissolved into silence. That silence, once unbearable, was now a companion, a witness. He turned to leave, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the sound behind him wasn't echo or absence. It was stillness. That night, the stars came out clearer than they had all season. Eli sat on the veranda, legs tucked beneath him, sipping warm tea. The journal remained inside, closed, undisturbed. He didn't need to revisit it. Some truths once spoken are better left breathing in silence. He looked to the stars and thought, not of loss, but of how light travels even from dead things. His brother might never return, and yet his presence remained in wind, in memory, in every part of Eli that now knew how to stay. The tea steamed gently in the night air. He exhaled slowly and whispered to the sky, not to the past but to what was to come. I'm ready. The days grew longer. Spring crept through the forest like a memory returning without warning. Eli moved slowly through the trees, his steps unhurried, breath steady. He no longer walked to forget. He walked to remember, softly, kindly. The stream that once froze now ran free, a whisper of melted grief. He knelt beside it and touched the water, cold but alive. He saw his reflection, older now, and not just in years. Something had shifted behind his eyes. The burden he had carried had not vanished, but had become lighter, as if shared by the forest itself. As he stood, a small bird flitted past him, and he smiled, not because of what it meant, but because he didn't need it to mean anything at all. Inside the temple, Eli rolled up the old scroll of his childhood drawings. He tied it carefully with twine, not to hide it, but to preserve it. The altar now held fewer things. Simplicity had become a form of prayer. He lit a single candle and bowed, not to the past, not to his brother, but to this moment. There was a quiet fullness in his chest, a knowing that didn't demand certainty. He sat on the mat, spine straight, eyes open. Meditation was no longer about escape. It was a homecoming. As breath moved through him, he whispered a name. His brother's, not as a cry, not as a wish, but as part of the air itself. It did not echo. It simply existed. And so did he. That afternoon, Eli passed the tree once more. The initials carved there had grown faint, almost erased by time. He smiled and didn't stop. There was no need to touch the past to prove it had happened. It lived in him now quietly. He walked further into the forest than he had in years, not seeking anything, just being. Birds chirped unseen. Branches swayed gently. Everything was ordinary. And in that ordinariness, he found something sacred. He paused beneath a canopy of light, filtering like lace through the leaves. His hand brushed a fern, its tiny curls soft and wet with dew. He inhaled deeply, and in that breath, he felt no loss, no memory, only now. Evening came without sorrow. Eli sat on the edge of the veranda, feet bare, cup of tea warm in his palms. No journal, no letters, no ghosts. Just the sound of the wind and the faint rustle of bamboo nearby. He watched the sky change, gold slipping into indigo, stars blinking into awareness. A crow flew overhead, silent this time, wings stretched wide. Eli watched it disappear across the horizon. Be well, he whispered. Not to chase it, not to hold it, just to release it one last time. The stars held their places. The breeze cooled. He sipped his tea slowly and let the silence wrap around him, not as absence, but as the music of a life finally made whole. That night, long after the candle had gone out, Eli whispered a final thought to the dark. It didn't come from pain or hope. It came from peace. The kind that knows no answers are coming, and no more are needed. The moon cast silver light through the window, gently painting the floor. And in that quiet eternal hush, one sentence formed on his breath, so soft it might never have existed, and yet it did. A truth not shouted, not even spoken fully aloud, but held within like fire in the center of the chest. "He left," Eli whispered, "but I stayed, and in staying I became whole."